Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 298, Sunday, December the 31st, New Year's Eve. In fact, by the time you're watching this video, it will be Happy New Year, everybody. Yes, it will. It will be Happy New Year, I'm sure, by the time you're watching this video. And what better way to start the new year than to go ahead doing what we've been doing for the past year of 2017, destroying the wacko leftist crazy arguments and stories, which is the case here today, because I'm sure, as most of you know, on Friday, after Lindsey Graham went on Fox News and basically said that he had seen the evidence that the dossier was used to get the FISA warrant, the lamestream media, headed up by the New York Times, dropped this article about Papadopoulos meeting with an Australian foreign diplomat in the UK in a bar, where he told him all about the Russians having emails, the Rotten Reverend Clinton's emails, having dirt on Hillary, and based on that, according to the New York Times, that's what set in motion the Trump-Russia investigation. Of course, we all know that's bullshit, and that's what I'm going to prove to you here today to start the new year off right. We'll set the New York Times and their friends straight. Let's get to it. Immediately following Lindsey Graham's appearance on Fox News, where he confirmed that the dossier was used by the FBI, the DOJ, to get the FISA warrants, the New York Times attempts to drop a phony propaganda piece that tries to make the argument that the unpaid temporary low-level advisor to the Trump campaign, George Papadopoulos, was the reason the FBI launched their investigation into Trump and his team. And who is behind this? None other than Maggie Haberman, the mouthpiece for the Rotten Reverend Clinton and her criminal friends at the CIA, DOJ, and FBI. Haberman is not a journalist. She is a propagandist, and anything that she writes should be carefully scrutinized. Haberman and the Clinton Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign were exposed by WikiLeaks in an email thread that was put on an email chain that was passed through the top tier of the Rotten Reverend Clinton's campaign team: Robbie Mook, Neera Tanden, John Podesta, and all the rest. Here is the email with Neera Tanden describing why the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign could count on Maggie Haberman. Quote, "We have a very good relationship with Maggie Haberman of Politico over the last year. We have had her tee up stories for us and have never been disappointed. While we should have larger conversation in the near future about a broader strategy for re-engaging the beat press that covers the Rotten Reverend Clinton, for this we think we can achieve our objective and to do the most shaping by going to Maggie. Maggie did the shaping and everything else for the Rotten Reverend Clinton in the 2016 campaign. She is a pipeline directly from the CIA as well. She serves as like a router. You contact Maggie Haberman and she can direct stories, the stories you want, into the New York Times, get them on CNN, Yahoo News, Politico, and then everyone else copies that. That's how it works in the media swamp in D.C. Maggie Haberman is the one who was behind that story in the New York Times, and now we are going to destroy that story, point by point. First of all, the timing, the content, and the presentation of this disinformation piece should automatically call it into question. Clearly, this is a desperation move by the perps who are being exposed to change the narrative and confuse the facts and the truth. Let's break this piece of garbage propaganda down and expose it for what it really is: total bullshit. First, as I stated in the previous video, if this was actually legitimate intelligence, how would it get leaked to an unpaid low-level volunteer on the Trump campaign rather than a CIA or FBI intelligence officer with no consequence to the leakers? It wouldn't. Next, if Papadopoulos' revelations were the reason for the investigation on Trump and his team, then why was it not included in the joint analysis report prepared by Comey, Brennan, and Clapper that outlined the intelligence collected regarding Russian interference in the election? Not a single reference to Papadopoulos is made in the joint analysis report. And of course, all three were brought in front of Congress after they wrote the report, and they all testified. There's been many closed hearings. Not a single peep about Papadopoulos. Now all of a sudden, he's the reason everything was set into motion. I'm not buying it, and something tells me you aren't either. If Papadopoulos information was so important, then why did Comey open the investigation into Russian collusion on July the 15th, 2016, but never got around to interviewing Papadopoulos until July the 15th, 2016, 6 months later? Now, the New York Times piece is trying to convince us that this whole thing started because of Papadopoulos and his revelations. But as we can see here, the investigation actually started 6 months before Papadopoulos was even interviewed. If Papadopoulos was so important to the FBI investigation, then why did all the intelligence agencies release their final JAR report without ever speaking to Papadopoulos ever? Not even once. So they want us to believe that Papadopoulos was the reason for all this to be set in motion, yet the fact of the matter is none of the three intelligence agencies interviewed him even once. If the Papadopoulos conversation in May 2016 was the origin to the source of the material of the FBI counterintelligence operation, then why were they denied the FISA application in June/July 2016? That's right, the first time they went to get a FISA application, right after this interview with Papadopoulos, they were turned down for a FISA warrant. New York Times. If Papadopoulos was the cause for the investigation, then why would the DOJ and FBI intelligence officials withhold this information for over a year? Refuse to discuss it, refuse to produce documents and witnesses, and then for some reason just release it to the New York Times. There we have this most important piece of information that for the past year we're all talking about the dossier. They're asked millions of times whether or not the dossier was used to get the FISA warrant. They won't respond. They won't answer the question. They won't produce the documents, won't produce the witnesses. They go through all this, and then finally, when Lindsey Graham actually sees the proof, then all of a sudden they pop up with Papadopoulos, tell he's the reason for all this. And then they start talking about Papadopoulos, and they leak this to the New York Times. They didn't even have the nerve to come out and say it themselves because it's so ridiculous. They knew it wouldn't fly. They know this is not going to fly with the majority of thinking people. They're counting on the liberal media outlets to pick this up so that they continue to work from the left as best as they can. What they're hoping for at this point is the best they can hope for is to try to muddy the water to make it look like no matter how much evidence there is to prove the wrongdoing and what actually happened, they want to have enough noise going on around it so that it makes it look as if there's all this confusion and that we just can't figure it out. No, we've got it all figured out. Yes, we do. If it was Papadopoulos the whole time, then why, after 8 months of hearings, including many closed sessions, why hasn't any of the persons interviewed ever mentioned the role Papadopoulos played? Not McCabe, not Rodenstein, not the dishonorable James Comey, not Brennan, not Clapper, not Yates, not Susan Rice, not Samantha Power, ever said a word about Papadopoulos. They've had plenty of opportunities. Never said a word. Which is worse, using a law firm to hire a firm that specializes in smear campaigns to conjure up gossip, unverified and salacious, to pipeline that information directly to the FBI, CIA, and DOJ and key senators to justify an investigation, or to use hearsay based on a drunken tattletale gossip session between a low-level unpaid volunteer campaign worker and an Australian politician to launch an investigation. Oh, and with both of these scenarios, no evidence, only hearsay and wild, unverified accusations. So, they have the dossier, which is crazy enough, but when that doesn't work for them, what do they go to? Papadopoulos. A drunken conversation between him and a foreign diplomat. And we've already learned that the sources, the people who Papadopoulos spoke to, which are sources named in the dossier, have completely come out and stated that Papadopoulos is crazy, that he dreams a lot, that he makes a lot of things up and doesn't tell the truth. In fact, he's pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about the people he talked to and what they talked about. Yet, this is what the New York Times wants you to think this entire thing was actually based on. Just more proof that Maggie Haberman and the New York Times are full of shit. Happy New Year! Why is it that the dossier has been touted by the FBI for the last year by Ms. Haberman, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the CNN, MSNBC, the Democrats, and others as the smoking gun, full of truth and proven fact, now being completely discarded and replaced with a new, even more ridiculous narrative? Think about that. For this whole past year that we've been talking about the dossier and talking about the fact that it's a fraud, the Democrats, MSNBC, CNN, the New York Times, Politico, and all the rest, they've been trying to tell their listeners and viewers that the dossier was true, that it's all been proven, that it's all been verified, that it's the real deal. But now, all of a sudden, literally on the drop of a hat, on a Friday afternoon, just before New Year's Eve, a 3-day holiday weekend, when they know no one's going to be around to go on TV and debunk it, they drop this piece, and now they completely flip the script and now tell us that it's all based on Papadopoulos and what he said and what he did. Forget the dossier. Because the dossier that they've been writing for the past year, they know is about to be dumped. They need to find something else, and Papadopoulos, he's right there. He's Johnny on the spot with the solution. Why didn't Maggie or the intel community inform us that Papadopoulos worked for the Rotten Reverend Clinton State Department in 2011 and was put on the national security team by Reince Priebus? We, of course, know Priebus was working for the Deep Staters and McConnell's people. We know that he was probably one of the main leakers, because since he's gone, a lot fewer leaks coming out of the White House. How did Papadopoulos get introduced to Sergei Milian, who is known as Source D and F in the dossier? He was introduced to Sergei Milian in London 3 weeks after joining the Trump campaign. The same Sergei Milian who worked with Fusion GPS as a key source that formed the basis of the Steele dossier, even though Sergei Milian denies that. He denies that. Christopher Steele certainly says that Sergei Milian was one of the sources, but Milian denies it. And how in the world did Papadopoulos get introduced to Sergei Milian? How did he know Sergei Milian? How was that meeting set up? Very good questions, which I'm sure that some members of the committees in Congress will be asking. Was Papadopoulos working for Fusion GPS? It seems like it. Everyone he was talking to and collaborating with and colluding with certainly was. Was Papadopoulos a mole planted by the Clinton campaign and Fusion GPS? Maybe working in the cooperation with Reince Priebus? It sure looks like it. Who was Papadopoulos trying to... what was Papadopoulos trying to do all the time while working in the Trump campaign? Well, if we look at all those emails and we watch his activities, It seems that what Papadopoulos was up to during the entire time was constantly trying to set up meetings with people in the Trump campaign, with Russians, whom he said he could get meetings with. And he was probably lying. He was counting on Sergei Milian and his other buddy. But he probably could never even gotten those meetings. But as we know, every time he sent those emails to Manafort or Kushner and talked about, yeah, we need to get together and meet with this Russian guy, or I can get a meeting with this Russian guy or that Russian guy, they ignored him. And finally, we know from one of Paul Manafort's emails that he got tired of getting these emails from Papadopoulos, and he eventually said, hey, who's this guy who keeps sending me emails about wanting to get together with Russians? Somebody go talk to this guy and tell him to, do something else. Bring me a cup of coffee. Why did Papadopoulos get such a sweet plea deal from Uncle Bob, the executioner? I mean, he was involved in trying to engage in espionage operations, according to what we're being told here. I mean, if what we're being told, and the New York Times is all true, then this guy was out there trying to set up meetings to try to get Russian officials to give dirt to the Trump campaign and engage in all sorts of other activities which would generally get you into some real trouble. But Papadopoulos got a pretty sweet deal. Of course, he agreed to wear that wire, didn't he? Maybe that was the plan. You think? How and why would an Australian diplomat, deep stater, get drunk and talk espionage with a 30-year-old nobody in a bar in London? The diplomat, the Australian diplomat that we're talking about, was an equivalent to the Secretary of State. People like that always have security people around them. They're very careful about what they say and who they say it to. They're very, you know how hard it is to get an interview, a one-on-one with the Secretary of State, especially of the United States or Australia or the UK or some major country like that? It's pretty damn hard. How is it that Papadopoulos was able to just stroll up to him at a bar and start dropping all this stuff? And what made this guy take him seriously? Well, 2 months later, this stuff he was talking about these emails, they dropped from WikiLeaks. And so this Australian diplomat's, wow, that crazy guy from the Trump campaign I talked to in that bar in London that night, we were getting sloshed, he must have had something going on there, because it turns out he must have been right, because they just dropped those emails. I think I'll call the U.S. government and let them know. Yeah. What a script. What a script. Whoever wrote it. I wonder who wrote the script. You think it was Robbie Mook? John Podesta? Maybe Valerie Jarrett? Maybe James Comey? Somebody wrote a hell of a script, and Papadopoulos obviously played his role. Here's another thing that the New York Times piece tries to blow up into a big thing. She's talking about the fact that when Papadopoulos shares this information with the Australian diplomat that the Russians have these emails and they have dirt on Hillary, it was almost about the same time, 1 year earlier, almost 1 year prior to that Kim.com did that famous radio interview where he said that Hillary should be worried because Julian was her biggest enemy. She was trying to take him out, and Kim.com said, hey, Julian has got evidence, he has got communications, he has got dirt on the rotten Reverend Clinton, and she should be very, very worried about messing with Julian. That radio interview occurred 1 year before Papadopoulos ever had the conversation with this Australian diplomat. And as a result of that radio interview, the 4chan boards, Facebook, the entire internet, you can go back. In fact, I could probably go back and find in my own videos where it was all the buzz. Everybody talking about, what does Assange have? What's he got on Hillary? So the idea that this was a major deal, and the idea that Papadopoulos telling this Australian diplomat about the emails being the reason that they launched the investigation, when in fact it was 1 year prior that all this talk about Assange having dirt on Hillary and having information, which Kim.com said information is very, very important. So this interview that Kim.com did and all the buzz that it created and all the activity it created for an entire year all happened long before Papadopoulos, a year before Papadopoulos ever said anything. So the idea that these emails were out there or this evidence was out there about the rotten Reverend Clinton or the dirt on her was out there because of Papadopoulos is just total bullshit. It was out there the year prior, in 2015. New York Times. Fact. Papadopoulos pleaded guilty of lying to the FBI about who he talked to and what they said. 1 month prior to Papadopoulos meeting with Alexander Downer, the Russian diplomat, in a London bar, Papadopoulos claimed that Joseph Mifsud, who's one of the sources in the dossier, told him that the Russians had obtained rotten Reverend Clinton emails. Mifsud has denied knowing any high-level Russian officials or telling Papadopoulos about any emails. He says Papadopoulos is living in a dream world, and he laughed. Sure, because in the script and in the role that Papadopoulos was to play, it really didn't matter if what he was saying was bullshit. Because remember, Hillary was supposed to win. Trump was supposed to lose, and we never would be having this conversation. They would be able to say Papadopoulos, or their source. We wouldn't know about Papadopoulos. We would just know that a source got information from a Russian source, which in fact Mr. Mifsud is not actually Russian. He's actually like a Belarusian or something, or British or something. Actually, he's British, is what he is. But we would never know about any of this. But since Trump won and the rotten Reverend Clinton lost, basically what we have is that we're learning about Mr. Mifsud. And Mr. Mifsud, who was probably never supposed to be spoken with or even identified, was spoken to and identified by media sources. And when they asked him about it all, this is what he told them. He said Papadopoulos is crazy. He's making stuff up. I didn't know anything about any of that. I don't have any Russian contacts. He's crazy. Next, Sergei Milian, who is the shifty character known as Source D and E in the dossier, whose resume is full of lies and overstated accomplishments and influence has been proven. High-level Russian intel people would not give Milian the time of day. Milian himself has denied having any insider knowledge, information, or connections to the Kremlin on multiple occasions, and Milian says he heard about Russians having emails from the rotten Reverend Clinton from Mifsud, who has denied that, laughingly. He says it's a total fairy tale, and of course, Milian denies being a source of the dossier. So again, of the two Russian sources that Papadopoulos, this guy we're supposed to trust, who supposedly launched this Russian investigation, the investigation against Trump Russia, apparently both of the sources and the person he gave the information to, the person he says he got the information from, they both say it's bullshit. And that Papadopoulos has no credibility. And apparently, Uncle Bob and his posse has interviewed these individuals and has come to the conclusion that they're telling the truth. And that's why Papadopoulos was charged with lying. And that's why they got him to wear the wire. Because all this was bullshit and they knew it. The only purpose of this entire thing was for Papadopoulos to be able to be the setup man, the mole, and to at some point be able to be wired for sound. Part of the script. Why would the FBI, CIA, or DOJ take seriously the claims made by Milian when they had to know that he was working with Fusion GPS? They would have known this from very early on in their investigation. The very first thing they would look at is the sources. They would have seen Fusion GPS as soon as they identified Milian. And everyone knows in inside circles in Washington about Milian. He's a gadfly. He shows up at various parties. He shows up and tries to talk to people. He's always trying to work some sort of a game where he can make a few bucks doing this or doing that, using some corrupt politicians by setting up some meetings or supposedly having some information. He's just a gadfly. He's a nobody. In terms of Russian high-level intelligence and things like that, this guy would never get anywhere near high-level Russian intelligence or American intelligence for that matter. He was a low-level stooge, a useful idiot, as to be used as part of the play. And he also was never supposed to be known about, because he has no credibility. Like all the rest of these people, including the New York Times and Maggie Haberman. So, Papadopoulos was a mole, a plant. He is a proven liar, like Milian. Yet, this is the guy the New York Times, Maggie Haberman, and the Obama-Clinton deep state allies want to rest their hopes and dreams on. My friends, you should have stuck with the dossier. Will, DeSantis, Gowdy, Nunes, Jordan, Rand Paul, Graham, and all the rest fall for this silly attempt at a diversion? No. They won't fall for it. You won't fall for it. I certainly won't fall for it. No one's going to fall for it. This article by the New York Times by Maggie Haberman is total bullshit. I've just debunked it. There'll be many other people on YouTube that will debunk it in the days to come. They launched it right on a Friday night before a holiday, which is typical when you do this kind of stuff. It's not going to work. Once people recover from New Year's holiday and they go back to work next week, and once the rest of the journalists, the right-thinking journalists, once these rest of my fellow YouTubers, researchers, investigators dig into this story and really look at it and give it some thought, they will come to a lot of the same conclusions I've come to. They will come to a lot of the same facts I have come to, and many more. By this time next week, this entire thing will be completely 100% debunked. Debunked. And we'll still be back where we were when we left off, which is they better produce that dossier, they better produce the FISA warrant, the application for the FISA warrant. Lindsey Graham's already seen it, obviously. The House Intel Committee and House Oversight Committee, well, the House Intel Committee will definitely get to see it because Devin Nunes has said that they'll be in contempt if they don't produce it by the 3rd. That would be what, Wednesday? So they have until Wednesday to produce that. Plus, by now, you can assume that Devin Nunes has already seen that interview with Lindsey Graham, and he's probably called him and said, hey, I saw your interview on Fox. You know, I'd like to come over to your office and have a chit-chat. And I'm sure that Devin Nunes' committee is going to see that same thing that Lindsey Graham's committee finally got to see this past week. And it's going to show exactly what Lindsey Graham seems to tell us that it's going to show, which is that, of course, the dossier was used to get the FISA warrant, in which case it really doesn't matter. And all the other events that we look at them, if you look at the timeline of events, as we do all the time here on TowerGate, and many other people do these timelines as well, you can see that there's a perfect, you can perfectly line up the things that were happening on the dossier side as Christopher Steele and the FBI and John Brennan at the CIA, as they're passing all this on, as they're passing the dossier on to various people, you can see the various activities that would follow that would correspond almost coincident at the same time as these things were all falling into place, and where it would lead us as we got through the timeline. But when you take the Papadopoulos and try to plug his stuff into the timeline, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work in the timeline. The only thing that I could assess from Papadopoulos after he pleaded guilty and we found out he was wearing a wire, I could only conclude that he was some kind of a mole, because the number one thing he had the most interest in was arranging a meeting between Trump officials and Russians. This was his burning goal. How did he get even into that situation? It took some people around Trump to bring him in, and it appears that that would have been Reince Priebus. And also, there's another guy who brought him in named Clovis. Did some looking into him, and Clovis essentially was a retired military guy. He was a fighter pilot, He rose up high into the ranks of the military. He worked in the military-industrial complex for some time. Booz Hamilton, a CIA contractor. So I don't know if he's a bad guy or a good guy. I really don't know. Maybe he got fooled. Maybe he got duped. Maybe someone came to him and said, hey, you ought to give this Papadopoulos guy, a look. His father was a famous Greek politician. He's connected. He knows a lot of Europeans. He's a world traveler. He flies around. He talks to lots of important people. You might want to take a look at this guy and give him a shot. He's young. He's ambitious, overly ambitious, this type of thing. So somehow they were able to get him in, and so he looks more like a mole more than anything else. But ultimately, for the New York Times to write this story, to now try to change the narrative and hang their hat on this guy, Papadopoulos, and this crazy little tale that they're telling, is just not going to work. It's going to be debunked. It will have basically no impact whatsoever, and we're still going to get to the bottom of this barrel of fish, which stinks. Stinks badly, Marge. So, I will not be doing a video on New Year's Day, but I do wish you all a Happy New Year. I haven't really thought too much of any type of a New Year's resolution. I know a lot of people make New Year's resolutions. I haven't really thought of one, but if I was going to think of one, just off the top of my head, it would be my New Year's resolution. Not something I would resolve to, because I already do this. It would simply be to succeed at exposing the deep state coup and holding the criminals accountable. That would be kind of what my 2018 would be all about for me, because this is probably going to play itself out over the next 9 months or so. Probably, I think it'll go way until all the way up until probably up until the elections of 2018 before this thing shakes itself out. So anyway, Happy New Year. It's awesome being able to do these videos, and I appreciate all your support, everyone. And we'll be back on the 2nd, on Tuesday, with a new TowerGate video for 2018, and we'll keep on digging. You guys be safe and have a good night. Happy New Year.